May 3rd, 1999. A day that lives in infamy in the state of Oklahoma. Multiple towns and cities were hit by violent tornadoes that evening and into the night. But most of that pain was centered in the communities of Bridge Creek, Oklahoma City, Midwest City, Del City, and more. For more specifically, many were horrified at what had occurred at one of the multiple epicenters during the aftermath of one of the worst tornadoes in Oklahoma history. The city of Moore would be hit over the next 10 years by various tornadoes, with the F4 tornado in 2003 and an EF4 in 2010. However, those two tornadoes produced their worst damage outside of the Moore city limits. By mid-May 2013, many clearly remembered the destruction and heartache that happened 14 years ago. On May 20th, many were preparing in advance for the Memorial Day holiday in a week's time. But the residents across Moore on May 20th, 2013, would witness history repeat itself again, and their worst fears came to light. It was May 3rd, 1999, all over again. From May 18th through the 21st, 2013, a severe tornado outbreak broke out across the Central Plains, with the majority of the activity being observed across Kansas and Oklahoma. A total of 3 violent tornadoes were observed, with an EF4 in Kansas on the 18th and EF4 in Oklahoma on the 19th, but it was the last violent tornado from that outbreak that grabbed the nation's attention. On the afternoon of May 20th, an EF5 tornado tore through the city of Moore, Oklahoma, just a few weeks after the 14-year anniversary of the May 3rd, 1999 F5 tornado, which also tore through portions of Moore. The city of Moore now left in shambles, as they were now once again directly hit by a violent tornado. And unlike the other 2 near misses, this tornado tore through the center of the city. At the time of recording, it's been nearly 10 years since Moore was face to face with their second F or EF5 tornado. So today, I'll be taking a deep dive into the May 18th through the 21st, 2013 tornado outbreak, with a primary focus on the Moore EF5 tornado. I'll be going over the state of tornadoes so far before the outbreak, the synopsis, the outbreak itself, the aftermath, and the significance and legacy of the event. Welcome to Nature's Fury. 2013 was a weird year for tornadoes. Most of the tornado season that year was relatively quiet until mid-May, and most of the activity was contained within the last half of that month. A primary reason for the relatively quiet tornado season until May was that in March and April, unusual cold air persisted across much of the United States. Not to mention that the tornado season occurred during a La Niña to El Niño transition period. But the quiet period quickly changed come May 15th. A tornado outbreak occurred from the 15th through the 17th in the Southern Plains, including an EF4 tornado that struck Granbury, Texas. But of course, just as that outbreak came to a close, another outbreak was beginning to set up across Oklahoma and Kansas. But real quick, the majority of people who like these videos are not subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy what I create, consider subscribing. It helps the channel and tells me I'm doing something right. Anyways, back to the May 18th through the 21st, 2013 tornado outbreak. Beginning on May 16th and through the 26th, an extremely slow upper-level trough moved across the central United States. This slow-moving trough had an associated complex frontal system connected by numerous low-pressure systems. From the 16th through the 22nd, these frontal boundaries were stalled, stagnated across the plain states. The primary trough slowly moved eastward from the Rocky Mountains into the Great Plains on May 18th, with the surface low pressure with a dry line forming on the Colorado-Oklahoma border. The expectation was that the cap would break near the dry line, and the majority of the storms would form along the dry line. The primary threats for that day were for strong winds and large hail, and a few tornadoes. However, most of the activity occurred from the 19th through the 20th. On the 19th, a very moist and unstable air mass was located over Texas and Oklahoma and rapidly moving northward into eastern Kansas and western Missouri by mid-afternoon. A strong capping inversion was in place over the Central Plains in the morning hours, which eroded during the afternoon and evening. The leading upper-level low was located in the northern plains. A surface low was observed in Oklahoma with an associated dry line. But let's go a bit more in depth with the 20th. On the 20th, the upper-level trough continued to slowly move eastward just like the days prior. The leading upper-level low was located in the northern plains. A southern stream shortwave trough and a moderately strong polar jet ejected to the east-northeast from the southern Rockies towards the southern plains and the Ozarks. A surface low with an associated dry line was present in western Oklahoma, with a strong frontal boundary nearby. Storms were expected to initiate by peak heating and was expected to continue into the overnight hours, specifically with the biggest threat for tornadoes being located in Oklahoma with the sharpening dry line and the heat-aided surface low. Winds at the 500 millibar level were strong, with many areas across Oklahoma seeing winds around 50 to 70 knots. Cape values in Oklahoma ranged from 2,000 joules per kilogram to over 4,000 joules per kilogram, mainly over the Oklahoma City metro area. Dew points were extremely high, with those being in the 60s and 70s across Oklahoma, and temperatures in Oklahoma were in the 80s. Mid-level lapse rates ranged from 7 to 8 degrees Celsius per kilometer throughout the day in Oklahoma. Low-level lapse rates were from 7 to over 8 degrees Celsius per kilometer in Oklahoma, with the higher lapse rates being observed to the west of Oklahoma City. There were a few issues regarding the environment though, especially whenever it came to tornadoes. Firstly was storm mode. Mesoscale models showed that the storms that did form that day would upscale into a line by the time the storms were in eastern Oklahoma. The biggest chance for discrete supercells was in southern Oklahoma and northern Texas, while in central and northern Oklahoma, storms were likely to begin discrete but quickly organize into broken lines as storms continued to form. Low-level shear was the biggest issue. Winds at the 850 millibar level were less than adequate. By the time the Moore tornado formed, directly over the OKC metro area, winds at the 850 millibar level were around 35 to 40 knots. But it was a 700 millibar speed max over the Oklahoma City metro area right as the Moore supercell neared the area that allowed for the Moore tornado to form. The 700 millibar speed max, which was around 50 knots and peaked at around 70 to 80 knots, was not forecasted during the event due to how hard it is to forecast the 700 millibar wind spiking, especially over such a small area. Outside of the Moore tornado, low-level shear was weak, with the stronger low-level winds ending up being located further to the east. Storm relative helicity was also an issue. While earlier on in the day there was an abundance of storm relative helicity, come the mid-afternoon hours, effective storm relative helicity ranged from 50 to 100 meters squared per second squared, which is relatively low. Except for when the Moore tornado happened. Storm relative helicity peaked at over 200 meters squared per second squared over the Oklahoma City metro area, yet again, due to the 700 millibar winds sharply increasing. There was a suitable environment for severe storms with large hail and strong winds. The tornado threat was dependent on the supercell structure, if low-level shear was available, and if the structure was next to a frontal boundary, either the front directly over Oklahoma, or a remnant outflow boundary from the day before. For the 18th, the Storm Prediction Center issued a moderate risk for severe weather with a slim area for a 10% SIG TOR being over Kansas and Oklahoma, with the primary reason for the moderate being a 45 SIG hail that was located from Nebraska through Oklahoma. On the 19th, a moderate risk was issued yet again with a 15 SIG TOR risk being issued for Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri, with a 45% wind risk for those areas alongside a 45% SIG hail risk. On the 20th, another moderate risk was issued with a 10% SIG TOR risk being issued for Oklahoma, with the main threat being a 45% wind risk across Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri, and a 45% SIG hail risk for portions of Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri. The 20th was looking to be a very significant day for severe weather, but the last thing anyone was expecting, given the expectations for fast upscaling with the storms in central Oklahoma, the low amounts of low-level shear, and the relatively low storm relative helicity, was a violent tornado tearing through the 7th most populated city in Oklahoma. But before going into the 20th, let's go over the 18th through the 19th real quick. On May 18th, the day was mostly notable for numerous hail and wind reports. However, there was one violent tornado that day. Around 5:30 p.m., a supercell thunderstorm developed to the northeast of Dodge City, and then spawned a large EF4 tornado near Roselle, Kansas, destroying a home and 5 farms which were damaged. The tornado made a sharp northward turn within 1 mile near Roselle, with the NWS in Dodge City stating that Roselle likely would have been destroyed by the tornado. On the 19th, multiple strong to violent tornadoes touched down in Oklahoma and Kansas, with a suitable synoptic environment. Strong wind shear, CAPE over 2,000 joules per kilogram, and peak daytime heating breaking the cap that was in place over the states by mid-afternoon. A terrifying supercell in Kansas aimed straight for Wichita, leading to the NWS issuing a tornado emergency for the city. The tornado lifted before reaching downtown proper and was rated EF2. During the late afternoon, several storms developed into robust supercells within the state of Oklahoma, with several tornadoes touching down. At 4:41 p.m., a large EF3 tornado touched down 3 miles to the northwest of Luther, Oklahoma, and tracked for roughly 20 miles. An EF4 tornado touched down around 6 p.m. over Cleveland County, resulting in severe damage in multiple areas, specifically near Shawnee, Oklahoma. 2 were killed by the Shawnee EF4. As the day progressed on the 19th, the storms in Oklahoma dissipated, and the threat shifted to a wind and hail threat in Kansas and the upper Midwest, with numerous wind reports in Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin, just to name a few. Meteorologists in Oklahoma warned citizens that the threat of severe weather was far from over. Locals, such as Roger Graham, a former storm chaser who lived in Moore at the time, told me.
Yeah, so talk about the 19th, the day before. So both the 19th and the 20th, I keep, since I was a former meteorology major and still kept up with the storms and followed them very closely, the 19th and the 20th were well forecasted many days in advance by the Storms Prediction Center. And in Oklahoma, then meteorology and weather is kind of a big deal, even just to the layperson. So any person just walking down the street had a pretty good idea that there was a severe weather event for that day. And also because the 19th, Mother Nature showed her hand as far as what was capable on the 20th. It's the same storm system. Maybe the bullseye moved a little bit further south and west, right? So the 20th, what I remember vividly about the forecast was well forecasted event. That morning I went running like I normally do, and it was just sticky, humid, overcast, really just, even for Oklahoma, it was abnormally humid. It felt like I was running in the middle of the summer is what it felt like. Reminiscent for folks who remember May 8th, 2003, there's a very similar, kind of the lower atmosphere was just, really foggy, hazy, and you could tell we were just sitting on a powder keg. You didn't have to be a meteorologist to know that. But that was what I recall from the forecast. Was it was well forecasted. Everyone was talking about it. It seemed like most people were aware that day had the potential to be a high-end event.
Even with that threat in mind, nobody could have expected what happened on the 20th. As the sun rose across Oklahoma, it was unusually warm and muggy on the 20th, thanks in part to temperatures in the 80s and dew points in the 70s. It felt like a day in summer, not mid-May. It was like a powder keg. Any storm that could fire off in an environment like this would become severe. Although the question of multiple strong to violent tornadoes was not as certain. The main issue, low-level shear. At 1:10 p.m., the Storm Prediction Center issued a tornado watch for northwestern Arkansas, portions of North Texas, and the majority of central and eastern Oklahoma. The tornado probabilities were lower than one might think. A 40% chance of 2 or more tornadoes with a 20% chance of an EF2 plus tornado. The main threat was expected to be severe wind events with an 80% chance for 10 or more severe wind events, and hail with a 90% chance of 10 or more severe hail events. The wording of the watch mentioned that 1 or 2 strong tornadoes were possible that afternoon. The expectation in the watch noted that the tornado threat was likely to increase by early evening as the southerly low-level jet strengthened during that time. Rapid storm development was expected near the I-35 corridor and near the prefrontal dry line in Oklahoma. After the tornado watch was issued, 3 of the 5 TV news outlets in Oklahoma City suspended normal programming to do wall-to-wall coverage of the event, with the other 2 suspending programming when 2 severe thunderstorm warnings were issued south of the OKC metro area. Less than half an hour after the tornado watch was issued, thunderstorms began to fire in south central and central Oklahoma. By 2:05 p.m., 2 thunderstorms in southern Oklahoma were given severe thunderstorm warnings. Given that the storms were expected to peak in intensity by mid-afternoon, parents in the Oklahoma City metro area began to worry. Elementary schools began dismissing students around 2:30 p.m. Parents began arriving across elementary schools to pick up their children ahead of the weather. Of course, only those who got there before the tornado warning came were able to pick up their kids. At that time, another thunderstorm was forming over northern Grady County, and at 2:12 p.m., a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for portions of Grady, Cleveland, McLean, and Oklahoma counties. Conveniently for this thunderstorm in particular, low-level shear at the 700 millibar levels were located right over the OKC metro area, leading the supercell to rapidly intensify with adequate shear at the lower levels of the atmosphere. The thunderstorm also went through several cell mergers while this was occurring. The storm quickly began to develop a mesocyclone, with the 700 millibar winds ranging from 70 to 80 knots quickly beginning to approach the cell directly. Storm relative helicity near the OKC metro area began to peak at over 200 meters squared per second squared, and the potential for a violent tornado sharply increased for that narrow corridor where the supercell was heading. Rotation at the lower levels of the supercell quickly began to intensify. At 2:40 p.m., as the supercell continued to rapidly intensify, a tornado warning was issued for far northeastern Grady, western Cleveland, northern McLean, and southern Oklahoma counties. And at 2:56 p.m., Oklahomans would witness what could only be described as the beginning of 39 minutes of terror, as a tornado touched down in northwestern McLean County. At 2:56 p.m., a tornado touched down in northwestern McLean County, touching down roughly 4.4 miles to the northwest of downtown Newcastle. A K4 news chopper in the area caught the tornado forming on film. The tornado was a narrow cone as it formed, initially producing EF1 damage before rapidly intensifying and striking a subdivision on the north side of Northwest 32nd Street, where several homes were destroyed, including 2 that sustained EF4 damage. As the tornado moved to the north of Newcastle, it began to rapidly grow in size, becoming a large wedge tornado as it was caught on camera by local news stations and storm chasers. The tornado continued to destroy and damage several structures in a separate subdivision, producing EF3 damage. At 3:01 p.m., the National Weather Service in Norman, Oklahoma issued a tornado emergency for southern Oklahoma City and more. The tornado maintained EF3 intensity as it crossed the Canadian River into Cleveland County, and continued to move towards southern Oklahoma City and Moore, moving in a more easterly direction, straight for downtown Moore. The tornado began to rapidly grow in width once more, and the tornado briefly intensified to EF4 strength as it destroyed numerous homes near South May Avenue. The situation was becoming dire, and it was extremely urgent for people to take action. Given the intense debris ball caught on radar, the view of the tornado on the ground and in the air, for locals in Moore and Oklahoma City, their worst fear had come to fruition. Nobody wanted to say it, but it became apparent as to what this was looking like. It was extreme deja vu for those who had been living in Moore for at least 14 years. What it felt like. It was May 3rd all over again.
Okay, folks, this is essentially, you never want to say it, but we're going to say it right now. This is May 3rd all over again as far as the intensity of this tornado, where it is heading. and something has to change fast, or it's going to be very close to a May 3rd event. Never want to say that, but that's what we have right now. It is shrouded in debris, and it's a low wedge shrouded in debris. It's still on the ground back up in here.
As the urgency of the situation was being viewed live across the nation through the Weather Channel, or locally through television and radio, those in the area, specifically parents, raced to their local schools to pick up their children and take them home before the tornado reached those areas. Many were caught in traffic jams on the highways in South Oklahoma City and elsewhere. Parents who arrived at the schools were met with locked doors and nobody nearby. The schools were on lockdown until the tornado had passed, and parents were left to go home and simply pray that their children would be okay. The tornado briefly weakened and strengthened once more as it struck near Foreman Drive, flattening several homes and throwing numerous vehicles off of the roads. And then, the tornado formally entered Moore. The tornado traveled south and along Southwest 149th Street at EF3 to EF4 intensity. The tornado struck the Orr family farm and the Celestial Acres horse training area, where up to 100 horses were reportedly killed, with some being tossed into power lines or thrown into nearby buildings. At the Celestial Acres area, every building was leveled by the monster tornado. Next, the tornado struck Briarwood Elementary School. The school suffered EF4 damage, but miraculously nobody died. The roof was struck by a 12,000-gallon water tank from the Orr family farm, likely compromising the building's structural integrity. The tornado intensified further, entering the densely populated area of western Moore, flattening home after home, and peaking in intensity as an EF5 for the first time, with 2 well-built homes being swept clean. The tornado destroyed Plaza Towers Elementary School at EF4 intensity, with teachers and students hiding in bathrooms and hallways, waiting and praying that the hell would come to an end. 7 children died in the school during the tornado. The tornado continued to ravage neighborhood after neighborhood, with locals in the area watching in awe and horror as live footage from the ground and in the air showcased what was going down on the ground. The tornado began to take a more northeasterly direction, undergoing what looked like to be an occlusion, but as the tornado reached near Moore Medical Center, the tornado looped and then directly moved to the southeast before moving generally to the east, seemingly failing its occlusion. The Moore Medical Center sustained EF4 damage, and a row of brick houses to the south were completely swept away, sustaining EF5 damage. An open field behind the houses was scoured to a point where only the bare soil and clumps of dirt remained. The nearby Warren Theater was spared a direct hit, but sustained considerable damage to the exterior of the building. The tornado briefly weakened as it continued eastward and crossed I-35, before intensifying to EF4 intensity once more shortly after crossing the interstate. Several neighborhoods were destroyed beyond recognition, and one brick home on Hunter's Glen Court sustained EF5 damage, with only the slab foundation and anchor bolts remaining. As the tornado continued moving through eastern Moore, the Highland East Junior High's main building was spared, but the gymnasium was completely destroyed. The Moore Public Schools Administration Building was destroyed. The tornado became smaller in size, but continued to destroy numerous homes through multiple subdivisions. The tornado weakened to an EF3 before strengthening to an EF4 nearby 2 homes at a concrete building as it left town. Then, the tornado began to rapidly narrow and weaken, causing EF2 damage to a farm to the east of Moore. The violent updrafts in the supercell were now outside of the tornado's outer circulation. The tornado, now separated by the extreme updrafts, began to rope out and dissipated at 3:35 p.m., a third of a mile to the east of Air Depot Boulevard. As the Moore tornado lifted, the threat quickly became less favorable for tornadoes due to low amounts of low-level shear and storm relative helicity, especially after 4 p.m. Of course, multiple tornadoes did touch down outside of the Moore EF5 that afternoon. However, none came close to the sheer violence that was observed from the Moore tornado. The strongest tornado outside of the Moore EF5 was an EF2 to the south of Miami, Oklahoma. The rest of the reports came from hail and wind. 219 filtered wind reports were recorded, with 5 of those reports being for winds in excess of 65 knots. 105 filtered hail reports were recorded, with 8 of those reports being for hail larger than 2 inches in diameter. Of course, the cyclonic system's threats to human life and property were not just in the form of severe weather. In fact, the system itself produced heavy rainfall, leading to flash flooding across the country. Rainfall totals from the 16th through the 22nd showed multiple areas across the country receiving significant rainfall totals. Specifically in North Dakota, Minnesota, South Dakota, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Vast swaths of those areas saw rainfall totals in excess of 5 inches, with the most rainfall being recorded near Milton, North Dakota. But of course, the center of attention from the entire outbreak was located in a city that had already been a victim to Mother Nature before. As many across Oklahoma feared as the tornado had occurred, both meteorologists on the air and the locals knew exactly what had happened. It was deja vu to what occurred just 14 years prior. And for the city of Moore, it was far worse than what happened in '99. As the tornado left Moore, helicopters, storm chasers, and EMS rushed to the scene to find that the city of Moore was once again devastated by a violent tornado. Subdivision after subdivision was wiped from existence, and many people were now left with nothing. The tornado initially produced weak damage when it touched down near East Lake Road in Grady County, producing EF1 damage near Newcastle. But the damage quickly worsened as it crossed into southern Oklahoma City. 2 small neighborhoods to the northwest of Newcastle were struck first when the tornado began to intensify. The buildings in the area suffered heavy damage, with most of the buildings being destroyed. 2 houses in the first neighborhood sustained EF4 damage. The tornado maintained EF3 intensity over open fields, and that was reflected in the damage. But as the tornado's path neared Moore, the damage began to show signs of being more violent. Car parts were wrapped around trees that were clearly debarked, and 2 houses near South May Avenue collapsed on themselves. In one home, the owners took shelter in their above-ground master bedroom closet. The owners were hospitalized as the tornado tore their house to shreds. Off of Foreman Drive, 2 houses were completely destroyed, and a well-constructed house off of South Virginia Avenue was reduced to its slab. Then, the Orr family farm and the Celestial Acres area. The farm was shredded into pieces, and every building in the Celestial Acres area was destroyed. Based on contextual damage, the National Weather Service stated that the tornado was likely at EF5 intensity at this point. But of course, even if the direct core of the tornado missed the rows upon rows of houses just to the south of it, the vast majority of those structures suffered damage from the tornado, ranging from EF0 to EF3. The tornado directly struck Briarwood Elementary, leveling the elementary school where the damage was initially rated EF5, but further inspection of the building found constructual issues and damage was downgraded. Despite the mangled mess that was left of the elementary school, everyone who took shelter in that school survived. The Westmore neighborhood, right next to the elementary school, was leveled. Aerials of the neighborhood showed total and absolute destruction across the center of the tornado's path, and 2 houses observed EF5 damage. A well-built brick home that was properly anchored was reduced to its slab, and the second house to the east of the first also suffered a similar fate. The Plaza Towers Elementary School was completely obliterated by the tornado. Before the tornado struck, the school allowed for parents to come and pick up their children. By the time the storm came, only 75 people were in the school. Teachers and students took shelter in bathrooms and closets as the tornado tore through the school. A 3rd grade teacher and 11 of her students took shelter in a hallway, and were trapped when the walls of the corridor collapsed on top of them. The teacher, Jennifer Doan, was 2 months pregnant with her third child. She suffered severe back injuries but did not lose the child. She, alongside 6 of her students, survived. However, that wasn't the case with all the children inside that elementary school. A total of 7 children died in Plaza Towers Elementary School from the Moore tornado. A parent's worst nightmare, as the students were doing as they were told, going to an interior room or enclosed space away from windows. The school did not have a storm shelter. Some of those who were doing search and rescue broke down into tears thinking of their own children. Rows of houses from Southwest 12th Street south through Southwest 16th Street saw EF4 damage, with many being destroyed or severely damaged throughout. A row of houses on Ridgeway Drive were just gone, reduced to rubble and debris scattered about. More EF5 damage was found near Southwest 6th Street, where the tornado stalled as it did a loop in its track. 4 houses, well anchored and constructed, reduced down to their bare slabs. The Moore Medical Center was heavily damaged. The top-story exterior walls had collapsed, and the building was now unable to treat patients. Thankfully, nobody in the building was injured. Multiple houses in between South Howard Avenue and South Broadway Avenue suffered total destruction or heavy damages, specifically in Southwest 7th and 8th Streets. EF4 damage was observed again near Madison Place Drive, Stone Ridge Street, and Blue Ridge Lane. EF5 damage was observed once more off Blue Ridge Lane, with another house being swept down to its foundation. The tornado's wrath of destruction continued through Eastern Moore, with images of houses being reduced down to rubble or their slabs being constant throughout. Numerous homes were just leveled. Off of Southeast 5th Street, a house was swept clean to its foundation, with 25% of the base plates being removed and the anchor bolts also being removed. The last house that sustained EF5 damage was left with almost nothing, as the slab and some of the anchoring was all that was left. The last EF4 area of damage was found off of Country Lane, where houses were now just areas of debris. Damage was limited as it exited Moore, as the tornado went on a weakening trend. Of course, many people were away from home, and many rushed home to find out what happened, such as Roger. Roger, alongside his wife, rushed to see if their home was still intact, and what had happened was the worst-case scenario.
Yeah, so I waited for my wife to come to the office. I had a feeling it got really close to our house. I had a feeling it was hard to tell because something else when we were in the bathroom watching on the laptop, the Wi-Fi cut out. So we were, we had no idea after we knew it was going into Moore, but wasn't quite sure what streets. And so I texted my neighbor. I said, hey, let me know what our house looks like. And I got a response from him, and he said, it's gone. That was it. It's gone. So I wanted to talk to my wife and kind of mentally prepare her for what we were about to walk into. So we rode in one car. We knew that we weren't really sure what our plans were at that time. And, when we're driving up, it's just a long line of cars. So for folks that are familiar with this area, I usually took the back roads to get back home, and I came up, I think it was Telephone Pole Road, and eventually over onto Santa Fe. That usually takes me 15 minutes to get home, and I think we were stuck in traffic for about an hour and a half and not moving. So what I did, and I was in business casual, so just slacks, button-up shirt, and my wife was, teaching, so she was in teacher clothes, and we parked about 2 miles away into this subdivision, and I just started running. I tore up. I had some brand new leather, I guess about a year old nice leather shoes, $100 some odd pair of shoes, which was a lot for me back then. Just ruined them. There was mud everywhere. This weird smell of, I can't quite describe it, but it's natural gas mixed with kind of this moldy, musky smell and fresh cut grass and trees. And when I came up, and I mean, it's just everything's flat. You see, everyone probably watching this video has probably watched videos of tornado damage and what it looks like from a camera. But when you're looking 360 degrees and all you see is just flat and just everything is reduced to, rubble and just lumber, timber, just everything's thrown about, people's belongings. When we came up, people were still digging people out of their houses or looking and searching and rescuing people. There was plenty of people on the scene when we were walking up, so that was all. Wasn't anything we could do at that point. We were just trying to get back to our house. We finally made it back. And my house was at the end of a cul-de-sac, and it was just, everything was gone. And the first thing we noticed in the yard was my wife's wedding dress just strewn out in the front yard. And then just the rest of our house looked like it was just collapsed on itself. And every house in our cul-de-sac, the street over to our south, everything. I mean, every block. We were basically the middle of the path of the tornado. I could look to the west. I'm sorry, I could look to the east and I could see I-35. I couldn't do that if I got on my roof of my house. I couldn't see I-35. So, I mean, literally just you're looking straight west or, I guess west, north, or southwest, looking northeast, and all you can see is just flat. So when we got home, I went and grabbed my safe that was in my storm shelter. So I grabbed my safe, which had all of our, insurance documents, birth certificates, marriage certificates, all that stuff, and passports. And I grabbed it, just was holding it. I was able to reach into my closet through as the house was collapsed. I reached through the back wall and grabbed just a couple of shirts. I was like, I don't know what I was grabbing. I was just grabbing them and threw them on my back, just kind of throw over on my shoulder. My wife tried to grab a couple of things too, because we could kind of get to our dresser, but it was wedged underneath a bunch of it was just wedged underneath the roof or not the roof, but the awning, or I'm not really sure, just the area that's below the roof, your attic area, right? That was all sitting on top of this dresser, and we're trying to get in just to get something, right?
The devastation and destruction observed after the Moore EF5 tornado was nothing like the city had seen before. The numerous buildings left as piles of rubble, the excessive ground scouring in some locations, the smell of gasoline and various gas leaks that plagued the city. The city of Moore has had its fair share of violent tornadoes, none as infamous as the 1999 tornado. But specifically for the city of Moore, the 2013 EF5 was the worst tornado that had ever rocked the city. The damage in 1999 was horrible, but in Moore specifically, the level of devastation observed throughout the city, not just a sector of it, was never seen before. The chances of the same city being hit by two violent tornadoes, an astronomical probability. On May 20th, Governor Mary Fallin declared a state of emergency for Moore, deploying the state National Guard and calling President Barack Obama for federal aid. President Obama signed a federal disaster declaration for the state of Oklahoma and visited the site on the 26th. On the 21st, both the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate held a moment of silence to pay respects to the victims of the tornado. A solemn moment where those of opposing political ideologies put aside their differences to pay respects to those who had perished. Government officials pledged to help those who had lost so much and more, and help the community rebuild. On a community level, everyone was trying their best to help each other. Charities such as the Red Cross came in to give supplies, and neighbors were helping each other out. Roger Graham had his own experiences with the generosity that Oklahomans gave that evening, as he picked up the pieces from his home that was now destroyed.
It was interesting. There was people that were just, it was just like a sea of humanity. People were walking around just dazed. People were covered in mud. It looked like a scene from like a zombie movie. Just people were just dazed. People were just like, talking amongst themselves. Just some people were kind of trying to make light of the situation, which I don't blame them, because it was a pretty heavy situation. A lot of us lost everything during that time, and and somebody came up on a golf cart and said, "Hey, do you guys need a ride?" And like, yeah, let's go. And so we loaded up on this golf. I don't know why a golf cart was just randomly in our street, but they hauled us back to our car. This lady that was, I think this is the precursor to what we experienced after the tornado, was this random generosity, kindness given, and grace shown to us. And even so, where we parked at our car, this lady came out and said, "Hey, you guys want some bottled water?" Just the lady that we parked in front of her house. So I think those things that happened, after the fact, gave me some assurance that everything was going to be okay. We were both fine. The only thing we had on us was just a couple of T-shirts I grabbed out of the closet and in my big safe that I was walking around, lugging around. But I felt that everything was going to be okay.
The Moore EF5 had peak winds of 210 miles per hour, with a peak width of a little over a mile wide, traveling for approximately 17 miles over 39 minutes. The tornado caused $2 billion in damages, injured 212, and killed 24, with 2 additional indirect deaths. Since the city of Moore had been hit twice at this point by 2 EF5 or F5 tornadoes, steps were taken to address the issue of public safety in Moore and in Oklahoma as a whole. In Moore, only 2 of the schools in the Moore school system were equipped with tornado shelters, the 2 that were hit by the Bridge Creek Moore F5 tornado in 1999. A proposal was made that would make it mandatory for all schools in the state of Oklahoma to have a storm shelter, including schools built before and after the bill's passage. The bill had wide support from locals. The problem came down to funding. Since 2013, many schools have built storm shelters in them. However, those shelters only apply for a third of all schools in the state of Oklahoma. In 2014, the Moore City Council voted on a proposal that would make 12 changes to its residential building codes, including changes that would require new home construction in the city to require hurricane clips or framing anchors, continuous plywood bracing, and wind-resistant garage doors in order for homes to withstand winds equivalent to that of a high-end EF2 tornado. The vote was held on March 17, 2014, and passed unanimously. The city of Moore became the first city in the United States to adopt a building code addressing the effects of tornadoes on homes, exceeding the national standards set by the National Association of Home Builders. On May 20th, 2013, the city of Moore came face to face with yet another violent tornado, one that ended up causing more destruction than the tornado in 1999 for the city. The city was leveled, left nearly unrecognizable for where the tornado went across. Neighborhood after neighborhood annihilated, with many left with the clothes on their backs. Of course, many had lost more than just their belongings. Some lost friends, family, neighbors, and their children to a monster from the sky. The loss of such, for one student of Plaza Towers Elementary, was too much. 5 years after the tornado struck, a 14-year-old survivor, Xavier Delgado, who lost 7 of his friends from the Moore EF5 tornado, took his own life on May 6, 2018. Losing those who mean so much to you is a pain that can only be experienced by those who have experienced it for themselves. Those children who died at Plaza Towers Elementary had so much ahead of them. So many dreams and paths ahead of them, just no longer with us. In 2022, the 7 students who died in the Moore tornado were honored. as they would have graduated from high school that year, taken away from the world way too early. And yet, despite all the pain and suffering, the city of Moore has continued to be resilient afterwards. Tornado shelters are more common in the city, and in the majority of schools in the school district. The building codes have been improved to improve tornado safety. The city has mostly been rebuilt, and while some of the scars from the Moore EF5 are still visible in the city, it's a brilliant showcase of a community effort to help each other out and to keep their community safe. It's been nearly 10 years since the Moore EF5. It's an event that the citizens of Moore cannot forget, and it's an event that I will not forget anytime soon. So, I'm finally out of college, so that's gonna be something to look forward to. A Reno trip has been cancelled. Of course, I addressed this on my Twitter and on the YouTube community post. But I have a lot of motivation to work on videos now, so that's great. Thank you all so much for the support lately. It's been insane. Special thanks to all my proofreaders, those being Rishi, Al, Griff, and Thomas Schwent. Nicholas for letting me use his radar loop that he created of the 2013 Moore tornado. Roger for agreeing to an interview. Celtic White for the character stills that I use. Zinel, Cyanide Blue, and Crackalick for letting me use their music when I use their music in my videos. And everyone for watching. It means a lot. Special thanks to those subscribed to the channel Patreon or are a YouTube member. Those being Ace Cooper, Haley Hazard, Montpelier, Tanner Lepper, That Dude, and Von Guros at the Elfies Army tier. Heldrake Zero at the Elf Junior tier. And Basilius of Stupidonia, Ed Taylor, Epics, Hannah Stormer, Jay Cario, King Shisha, Non-Binary, Sav770, Sandra Dunn West, Tennille's Weather Marine Space Station, Talkboy, and Worm Off the String at the Elf Mini tier. If you want to have access to full uncut interviews and my scripts alongside other things in the future, consider subscribing to the Patreon or becoming a member. It helps me financially and will allow me to do in-person interviews in the future. Anyways, that covers everything. If you enjoy what I do, consider liking, subscribing to the channel, commenting your thoughts, and sharing the video around. I'm Alferia, you all stay safe, and I'll see you all soon.